In Genesis 31, 1 to 5, we saw that Laban looked at Jacob with surly, snarly kind of countenance. And of course, Jacob wanted to discuss this with his wife, so he called his wives off on the field in a secret meeting, and he started talking. And we continue the conversation he has with his wife in verse 6 to 10. Genesis 31, 6 to 10. And you know that with all my power I have served your father. And your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. But God suffered him not to hurt me. And he said this, the speckled shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bore speckled. And if he said thus, the ring street shall be thy hire, then for all the cattle ring street. Thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father and gave them to me. And it came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived, that I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ring-streaked, speckled, and grizzled. So in verse 5, we had Jacob sending for Rachel and Leah to come to him in the field and explain to them how their father's disposition had changed towards him, and how he had deceived him in spite of the service he had forced out of him, and had altered his wages multiple times. But God had stood by him and had transferred to him their father's cattle, and now had directed him to return to his home in Canaan. Whew. So Jacob pleads his case to his wives. You know that with all my power I have served your father. Now the term Jacob here uses for the word that we translate in English, power, actually came from a Hebrew word meaning to pant. Well, who pants the most? Obviously, somebody that's worked really, really hard or did a marathon run. In other words, Jacob said he exerted all his strength to the point of exhaustion in serving Laban. Of this, his wife certainly had been witness for 20 years past, as they tried regularly to get his attention. He had to stick to the truth as much as possible. After all, he wanted his wives to go back with him to Canaan willingly. Then he further told them their father had changed the terms of agreement of what they originally agreed upon, at least 10 times. Now, whenever the Bible says 10 times, it means time and again, again and again. You know, they gave up counting. So that's why at least 10 times, he said 10 times, he changed his mind. But each time God intervened in enlarging Jacob's flocks. As we recall from chapter 30, Jacob left his wages, his hire, to the providence of God. In the original contract, Jacob had been promised all the multicolored animals. That's in chapter 30, verse 32. But in verse 8, he laid out examples of how Laban kept changing these terms. If he said, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the cattle were speckled. Ha! And if he said, the ring streaked shall be your way higher, then the next cattle that were born were ring streaked. So, or striped. So whenever conditions changed, all circumstances changed in Jacob's favor. It happened so often that it wasn't coincidence, and you couldn't describe it as coincidence. It happened so often that only God could be accredited for the results. So, in Jacob's words, thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father and given them to me. You know what's ironic? What's really ironic is that Laban's flock was much reduced by those means when Laban interfered, and there were more taken away to come to Jacob's share than if Laban had stuck to the original agreement. Strange, isn't it? Much to Jacob's credit, he downplayed any breeding tricks or of any means and methods he made use of, but wholly ascribes all to God and points to his wives, the hand of God only. See, verse 10, the last verse that we cover here for this session, points back to the beginning of his agreement with Laban at the time that the cattle conceived. He saw a vision of the cattle mating, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ring-streaked, speckled, and grizzled. Do you realize it's a vision? So it's a dream or a vision. And what happens there is you often see what isn't really there. The mating male animals were actually single-hued, but Jacob visualized them in his dream as striped, speckled, and polka-dotted. That's really what grizzled means. It means, like in a sheep, grizzled sheep would be black sheep with white dots on them. So despite odds that appeared both challenging and insurmountable, especially every time Laban changed the agreement, God appeared to be telling Jacob, take it easy. It'll be okay. Accordingly, friends, I'd like to quote from a chorus by Oscar Eliasson. And yes, I'm going to sing it. Ha! Got any rivers you think are uncrossable? Got any mountains you can't tunnel through? God specializes in things thought impossible. Well, he can do what no other friend can do. Yes, there's more to the song, but I figured that was the appropriate message for today. God can do what no other friend can do. He specializes in things thought impossible. Take it easy, my friend. It'll be okay.